Neskantaga that have taken some time and are quite complex. So I would put to you, without generalizing, because it's very important not to generalize, that the ones that have been added to the number, and at some point we should take some time to walk through this, and perhaps the time allotted is not enough. But those ones are ones that we are cautiously optimistic will be lifted in relatively short order. Now, and you talked about the website, about it being not updated. Clearly, there have been some challenges as communities have locked down, rightly so, to protect their people, and infrastructure challenges in getting things built. We have been able to do so, and the long-term lifts are testament to that. But there have been challenges. So we expect to be updating that web page shortly to reflect a more detailed information as to where the challenges lie, where the numbers lie as well. But COVID has placed a challenge on the ability for contractors to get into communities and to do all the things we need in order for communities to lift long-term water advisories. And let me stress, it is communities.
Minister, I don't want to be rude, but I do want to get one more question, and if you can, my time is running short.
No, please. I want to talk about this, but I do respect the fact it's your time, Gary.
Sorry.
For a minute. Go ahead.
We live in a world where technology and advancements are happening all the time, and you know, I guess just one last quick question around the approach the department's taking to solving the boil water advisory issue in First Nations communities or Indigenous communities. Can you identify any kind of new technology, any kind of investigations that are being done in new approaches? I mean, in my time as Sask Water Chair, there was all kinds of new technology happening all the time. Could you identify any specific things in that manner that your department's doing to advance this cause?
Very quickly, Minister, sorry.
Well, we always work with communities to work with any solutions that we work in partnership with them for their needs in their communities. Now, some of these plants are state of the art and reflect the highest technology that is available. Obviously, that requires training and a long-term commitment. This, I think, I was getting to the end of in my point, is that we need to be with Indigenous communities for the long run, and that's what we will be. It goes way past any deadline in spring 2021, but for a much longer time to come. And communities, as a matter of trust, are asking us to do that, and we will be there for them. Hence the statement in the speech from the throne from the Governor General.
Thank you, Minister. And now for our next 6-minute questioner, we have Mr. Baptiste. Jaime, please go ahead.
Yes, and I think that's an important topic, and I want to give Minister Miller enough time to finish his comments around water, because as a Mi'kmaq person who lives in a Mi'kmaq reserve, you know, I woke up during this summer without water, and I know that has a extreme effect, and I've been under water boil advisories and not known, unfortunately, until my son reminds me. So I just wanted to give you a chance before I get into my question to finish off that piece that, as you were unfortunately rushed kind of through it in the last questioning.
Well, I guess my point to conclude, MP Baptiste, is that communities have asked us, and it's a matter of trust building and confidence building that is always in question, to be with them in the long run. And the speech from the throne underlined not only the critical infrastructure deficit that COVID has laid bare in Indigenous communities, but the need to build that trust and to be with them in the long run, far past any deadline that the government has fixed, and in partnership. And you and I participated in a great announcement for the Atlantic Water Board. The name escapes me, and
First Nations Water Authority.
The First Nations Water Authority this summer, which is really groundbreaking in the way that the authority itself is transferred into a First Nations-led authority to dictate what goes on with respect to water in the communities that participated on their terms. And I think that is key. It is the key to the way forward, and is key to addressing a number of the issues that MP Vidal raised in terms of how these plants are built.
And I would just echo that I agree that the best approaches usually are when the First Nations are able to come up with their own solutions and take those solutions back to the government. I want to pivot now to just a little bit about COVID, and the first wave, we were very successful in the Atlantic of keeping it away from the Mi'kmaq and Maliseet communities that we have in here. And I want to thank the ministers for their work on that. You know, we're looking at the second wave, and while it's slowly progressed its way towards the Atlantic, which has been the Atlantic bubble that has been successful. I was really saddened to hear that the Mi'kmaq community of Listugush now has its second confirmed case. And with the interactions between families in the Mi'kmaq and Maliseet throughout the over 35 communities in the Atlantic, I'm wondering, how is the government working with communities right now to flatten the curve, and what can individuals do on their part in these communities to stay safe during this second wave?
This is an excellent question, and the reason I raised the alarm with respect to the number of active cases is that we have seen a resurgence in Indigenous communities, and it's following in lockstep with the second wave that's happening all over Canada. What we've seen is a drop in vigilance. It's understandable as the economies open up, and as we take a more surgical approach to how we deal with COVID. We've learned about how this virus acts and reacts, but we still don't know everything yet. What we know is that when we trust Indigenous communities and we trust in their decision making and accompany them every step of the way, the things that they do, Indigenous communities take pandemics very seriously. They've been through many of them with fewer advantages that in non-Indigenous communities we all take for granted. That has worked. There's basic quote unquote shutting down of communities, taking the public health authority, lifting up the doctors and nurses in the community and letting them dictate the public policy, which is so key, as we've done at a federal level, to making sure people comply, showing leadership across the board. This has shown incredible results, including in nations with alarming spreads at the beginning, at the onset, where communities have stepped up. Basic hygiene messages have been enforced and reinforced. Testing, tracking, and isolated, even in conditions that would be unacceptable in non-Indigenous communities, situations of overcrowding, which we all know well as a committee, including in jurisdictional challenges like La Loche. But we do know that where we have seen alarming spreads is where people let their guards down. Emotional events like weddings, funerals, religious ceremonies. And the key in here is not to judge, to ensure that we're getting all the information we can to work in lockstep with communities and make sure that that crucial aspect of tracking and isolating is done without judgment and done effectively so as to isolate, separate, and eventually completely stamp out COVID. This works. It's proven to work, and Indigenous communities have shown the way. That leadership is incredible and key in ensuring that this has been stomped out. It causes a lot of fear and apprehension, and as I mentioned in the French portion of my remarks, there's a hidden face of this pandemic, which is the mental health crisis, the worst iterations of which are the opioid use and abuse, suicide, and ideation. These are all big challenges that we will face going forward, and indeed we won't know the effects for some time to come. It's why we will keep mobilizing targeted envelopes and trusting communities to do what they know best, which is to protect their people.
Thank you. What time do I have, Mr. Chair?
Half a minute, 30 seconds.
I'd just like you to comment a little bit on the education funding that was rolled out in the fall, how it's been received, has it rolled out, and are the First Nations communities that are under self-sectorial government authorities like MK getting that as well?
Just 5 seconds, sorry.
It's okay. It's okay.
It doesn't paint the complete portrait of Indigenous education in Canada. Obviously, there's some interweaving with the provinces and territories, but the announcement that the Prime Minister made was targeted specifically to institutions on reserve, with some exception. But again, I want to make this point: is that ISK stands ready to help as we trace the course of the pandemic to help kids in Indigenous communities with their needs. And
Thanks, Minister.
Feel free to reach out.
6 minutes now, Madam Berube.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm on the traditional territories of the Algonquin, Anishinaabe, and Cree. So I will ask Minister Vandal, after what he said recently, you said that you're providing over 130 million in funding to meet the territory's immediate needs in health and transportation relating to COVID-19. But we know that there have been restrictions on travel, and lockdown has made it necessary for many air carriers to reduce or interrupt service because they cannot cover their operating costs. So, Minister Vandal, what measures will you take to help northern carriers now that the emergency funding period is done?
You need to unmute, Minister.
Mes excuses. Une très bonne question.
My apologies. That is a very good question. I know that in April we announced at least 130 million rather, for the north, including the territories. That included 17 million for air services, air transport. We realized it was a good beginning, but that it wasn't enough. In working with the Office of Minister Garneau, we were able to announce another 75 million for the air industry until the end of this year. That includes all airlines serving Ontario, Manitoba, and Saskatchewan in the north, and to some extent, I believe, Quebec as well. That 75 million will take us till the end of the year. After that, we'll do an assessment, and if necessary, there will be another 75 million provided for the 6 months that follow. That will take us to June 2021. And at the end of June 2021, we'll reassess and see where we are with COVID. I think there is money available for another 6 months if needed. That initiative is sponsored by Minister Garneau. I'm working closely with him. I know how important it is to make sure that supply chains remain intact, aren't broken. It's important for medication, for food. And we know that once those supply chains are broken, they are that much more difficult to rebuild. So we're working with industry, the communities, and the provinces and territories. I have another question for you. You know that there have been incidents. Food costs are going up because of the lack of air transport. Essential goods are also very expensive. Costs are going up, prices are going up without end. So what are you going to do about it? Well, that is why we're supporting the air industry. We don't want those supply chains to be broken, and we want to ensure that they remain sound so that essential services can be maintained. We also have programs like Nutrition North that subsidizes food in isolated communities. That is well known throughout isolated communities, remote communities. It's a popular program, and we will continue providing support. We have boosted the funding for Nutrition North by 25 million. That was in April. We've also added the Harvesters program to ensure that Inuit and Indigenous nations can continue hunting for traditional foods. We are working closely with communities and with the public service to achieve this. Thank you. I have a quick question for Minister Miller. You spoke about health care professionals in Indigenous communities providing care, contact tracing, and quality treatment. Have you had any accounts and reports on what happened in the far north in Quebec? Are you, and the rest of Canada, are you talking about Nunavik? Yes. I would ask Valerie Gideon to answer that question.
We just have 10 seconds. Please go as quickly as you can.
Et donc, au niveau du Nunavik, on est
In Nunavik, we are regularly in touch with the public health group of Inuit nations. At the beginning of the pandemic, we sent individual protection equipment, personal protection equipment when there was a need. We are meeting their needs as we go.
Perhaps we can pick up further on that later in our questioning, but right now I have 6 minutes with Ms. Blaney. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Chair, and I want to thank all the ministers and staff that are here with us today to answer these very important questions. You know, one of the chiefs in my riding recently said to me that it is only our communities that are having incremental justice, a little bit at a time, a spoon at a time, never the full meal, that we need to step ahead. So I just want to start with that and just say that I think in the history of this country, this has been the story of our country and continues to be the story of our country today: incremental justice, incremental human rights. So my first question is about housing. We know that a lot of Northern and Indigenous communities have housing conditions that are atrocious, that there is overcrowding. And this was an issue, of course, long before the pandemic became an issue. But now that we've added the pandemic to this, we know that people are in situations where they cannot self-isolate if they come down with COVID-19 symptoms or are exposed to someone who is tested positive. The government's response was tense and some other temporary structures. I see some action that's happened, but I'm just wondering, when are these communities going to finally see the necessary investments for a permanent housing solution?
I suspect the question is to me, or perhaps
That would be
Minister.
great.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, MP Blaney, for the question. We know that those infrastructure gaps, particularly in respect of housing, are both unacceptable and were part of the reason and the driver of communities being in a lesser position for poorer health outcomes with respect to COVID. And we know, in particularly in Inuit communities, how closed and unacceptable housing conditions are a vector of tuberculosis, for example. So this is, as you mentioned, absolutely nothing new. Clearly, as we looked at what was in front of us as we faced a historic pandemic, was that fact. And I note that you mentioned tents. I would insert a word of caution there, because these are highly specialized movable structures that are intended to isolate, and they are used in some cases for testing. They are adaptable for the winter up to -40. They have been a critical resource for some communities in terms of their COVID response, along with the repurposing that we've done of certain buildings in response to their pandemic plan needs. Now, I do agree with you that these are unacceptable conditions that First Nations, Inuit, and Métis communities, for that matter, face. This has been laid bare by COVID once again. That is why the Prime Minister, or rather the Governor General, mentioned as much in the throne speech in 2020, which was focused on the inequities that were laid bare by the COVID pandemic. We are in a response to COVID mode, and so clearly the safety of people in communities and their priorities need to be met. I am fully aware of this. We have an undertaking in government to close that gap by 2030. The question I think we all need to pose to ourselves is should we be doing that much quicker? And I would answer that for my own purposes in the affirmative.
Well, thank you for that. And again, I'll just mention that timeline and incremental justice. My next question is for Minister Miller and Bennett. I've had 2 serious outbreaks in my riding in Indigenous communities, one in Tla'amin, which is treaty, and one in Namgis, which is non-treaty. And I just want to do a big recognition of the amazing work of former Hagus Clint Williams and Chief Don Van Vick, who work so hard in their communities to address those issues, and of course recognize that we did lose one elder. I'm just wondering, from your perspective, what were the lessons learned from those communities, and how are we going to move forward in addressing when those types of communities across Canada are hit, knowing that one is treaty and one is non-treaty?
Perhaps I can take the small moment afforded to me to speak to really the excellent work done by First Nations Health Authority, which really is an example for all of Canada, and it exists only in BC, but they have really done some amazing work to ensure that the resources that we have at our disposition are deployed, are mobilized in conjunction with the government of British Columbia to ensure that communities stay safe, but also to respect the cultural sensitivity and lens that needs to be applied to this, and it actually saves lives. And the loss of any person is a tragedy, and particularly an elder. But the work that's been done in those communities has really been an example, not only to other Indigenous communities, but also to all communities in Canada. And I think if we looked at some of the measures and the seriousness with which those communities have taken and responded, we might, I would propose, have a better approach nationally. I actually am inspired by some of the work that's been done, and particularly the leadership shown by FNHI, Minister Bennett.
In just 15 seconds.
Yes, thanks for that, because I think that as we were communicating with the modern treaty and self-governing nations right from the beginning, it was clear that they had their own priorities, but their own way of doing things, and that so it was up to us to provide them with the resources they needed to respond. And then in the Friday calls that went on, have gone on really since March, they've been sharing best practices, wise practices with one another, but our job is to get them what they need, and that's what we've been doing.
Thanks very much for that round of questions. And now, just to reset, we were about 9 minutes late with the audio technical issues. I'm going to ask the witnesses if you're able to stay so that we can complete the second round of questioning, which should take 25 minutes. So is there any problem with Ministers Bennett, Vandal, Miller, and continuing on with the questioning? I know that our time schedule said 7:30, but we were, unfortunately, due to technical reasons, late getting started. So can we press on with the second round? See no no's, I'll say, okay, good. The second round of questioning, I have the 5 minutes with the Conservative and Liberal members, 2.5 minute questions with the Bloc and the NDP, and 5 Conservative Liberal. And my list is Melillo, Zan, Berube, Blaney, McLeod, and Vancouverden. Eric, would you like to start now for 5 minutes?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and I thank our witnesses, the ministers, for being here. I trust you all, you and your families all are doing well and healthy during this time. I would like to direct my questions to Minister Vandal, and as the minister knows, and as the minister noted, tourism is a large part of the northern economy, whether it's the northern provinces like my riding or across the 3 northern territories as well. And tourism is also a catalyst for other economic activity, whether it's support for retail stores or restaurants, and many other aspects. So I was disheartened when many seasonal operators and tourist operators had trouble qualifying for a lot of the business support that was announced with a lot of the rigid criteria. So I'm wondering if there was any sort of consultation or consideration of seasonal businesses when these programs were designed, and if so, why was it not reflected in the programming?
Yes, thank you, MP Melillo. That's an excellent question. And when I talk to the MPs from the north of Bagnell, McLeod, and Kekak, it's often mentioned that tourism is something that has really taken a hit in the north, and that's just a natural byproduct, I think, of keeping borders closed, and especially the big operators who go on the excursions in remote areas have been hit very hard I know that through CanNor, which is in Minister Jolie's portfolio, we've provided $15 million to CanNor for emergency funding to meet their regional challenges, as well as an additional $34 million through the RRRF Regional Relief and Recovery Fund to help businesses all across of all industries across the north, including the medical, hospitality, and natural resource industry. I know that in spite of this, the tourism industry is in deep distress, and consultations and discussions are ongoing with the Deputy Minister of Tourism of CanNor, who's actually.
Thank you, Minister. If I could just ask another question, just for 5 minutes.
Yep.
I'm wondering if you have, or your department potentially has, a sense or an estimate of how many businesses in the north were not eligible for the programming that they applied for.
I don't have that answer right now. Perhaps the Deputy Minister Watson has some information on that.
No, Mr. Chair, having not managed that program, that information is with CanNor, and so we don't have direct access to it.
Okay, thank you very much, Minister. I recognize, obviously, these programs had to be rolled out quite quickly, and there wasn't the potential to have this broad-based of a consultation, as I'm sure you would have liked. But our party, all opposition parties, and many government MPs as well, actually brought forward many proposals to change programming and flagging issues, whether it's businesses who didn't use a business account, or Indigenous businesses who were tax exempt on reserve, and many different reasons that they weren't able to qualify for the support. So I'm wondering, if Minister, if you could provide some insight into why it did take so long for some of these changes to the programs to occur.
Well, I think first of all, it's important to understand that our government from the beginning, from early March, has been consumed with trying to take care of the needs of Canadians, individuals, and businesses through this pandemic. Public servants have literally designed programs worth tens of billions of dollars and rolled them out very quickly. I think by and large, the vast majority of the programs landed well, and those that didn't, our government has shown a willingness to make them better. And having said all that, it's still not perfect. There's still a lot of work to do. There's still gaps, and it's incumbent on our government through the ministers to continue to talk to Canadians, to talk to business owners, and to see how we can make those programs even better. And there's many uncertainties in the world today. One certainty we do have is that our government will be there for Canadians throughout the pandemic.
Thanks, Minister. That's the time. And our next speaker is Lenore Zan for 5 minutes. Please go ahead, Ms. Zan.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much, Walalan. And I am on the unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq, the people of the Dawn, here in Nova Scotia. I'd first like to acknowledge that thank you very much for acknowledging the importance of the terrible residential schools that